Hello, Divorce and Beyond family. I've got some exciting news because we have teamed up with Headspace to guide you toward better mental health. With Headspace's meditation, mindfulness tools, and mental health support, you're set for a journey to a happier, healthier you. And there's more because if you sign up through our exclusive link, you'll enjoy 2 weeks of Headspace membership for free. So don't miss out on this opportunity to embrace your well-being. You can check out the show notes for the link or just go to divorcebeyond.com/headspace-Susan. And you'll be able to start your path to peace and joy today. This is just one more way that we can support you on your journey to a better beyond.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
So there's a process that can happen that takes a person from being traumatized to then going through divorce and being re-traumatized. It's the action of, in some cases, facing the abuser, whether it's in mediation or whether it's in litigation. That in itself can be terrible.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and listeners, today we are in the first week of October, and October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I want to just get right on top of that topic. It's so important to bring awareness and bring knowledge and bring the voice of experience and advice to you all the time, but especially in this very important month. So I've gone back to our favorite expert in this area. Beverly Price is joining us again. Hello, Beverly. It's wonderful to see you.
Hi, Susan. It's great to be here, and it's an honor to be asked. Thank you.
Well, I'm so happy that I know you are on a tour for this month to really raise awareness, but in fact, you are always on a tour to raise awareness, and we'll talk about that more. But for my listeners, if you haven't heard Beverly before on the podcast, she has several episodes. Go back into the archive and listen to all of them. I will link to them in the show notes for you just to make it easy. But quickly, she is a coach herself and works with women who are going through divorce, domestic violence situations. I'll call it seeking empowerment because really that's, I think, Beverly's secret power. Her secret sauce is helping women find that place. To that point, she has her own podcast, which I have been lucky enough to be on. It's called Her Empowered Divorce. And she's also the founder of the Divorce Coalition, which we will talk about. I also am a part of the Divorce Coalition, and it does very important work, not just in October, but all of the time to bring awareness to domestic violence, intimate partner violence, domestic abuse. There's so many different names for a very awful phenomena in our society that's certainly not something new. And I should mention you are also a survivor yourself. So you bring that to the table. So today, Beverly and I want to talk to you about the fact that divorce, where many of you may be right now, as I know most of my listeners are either thinking about divorce or in the process, how divorce can re-traumatize victims who've already been traumatized, and how hopefully we can either, reduce that effect or eliminate or mitigate that effect. So we're going to be diving into that today. So let's get into this, Beverly. At the very top level, how does divorce just re-traumatize someone? How does that bring it all back up?
Well, if you consider that those of us or those out there that haven't experienced any form of domestic abuse go through this complicated, difficult, challenging time, and you add on the fact that someone has been abused throughout a marriage, and then you add on to the fact that because of their situation, their frame of mind, that things through the court process are actually extra traumatic. For example, it can be the way they are spoken to. Research shows that many divorce professionals talk to them in a way that re-traumatizes them, to put them down, to accuse them, to belittle them, to tell them they didn't, they're imagining things. So there's a process that can happen that takes a person from being traumatized to then going through divorce and being re-traumatized. It's the action of, in some cases, facing the abuser, whether it's in mediation or whether it's in litigation. That in itself can be terrible. If you think too about the process of being abused, I know myself, you get beaten down so low, you lose your confidence, you have been so dependent on this person that mistreats you that you fall into this persona that then depends on another person. In that case, they may walk into divorce depending 100% on their attorney, almost acting like that attorney is God in a way, and they abdicate the ability to advocate for themselves. Then they get very disappointed that things don't happen the way they want. So there's any number of things, and it also depends on the nature of the divorce, whether there's ongoing legal abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, child abuse, religious abuse, you name it, it's out there. And so many people think abuse is just being hit and being bruised, and there's so many more forms of abuse out there.
Oh, right. I mean, some of my most popular episodes are with Dr. Christine Cocciola talking about coercive control, which is, a whole new level of abuse, but still so unrecognized. Not only in our courts, that's one element, but it's unrecognized often even by the victims of coercive control that is what's happening. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's break down what you just said, because there was a lot there for listeners. I want them to be able to unpack it all. So the first thing that you were talking about is the fact that going into the divorce process with, I'm going to say, untrained divorce professionals or unaware divorce professionals, they can unintentionally, I hope, not intentionally, but re-traumatize the abuse victim in a variety of different ways, as you mentioned, by how they speak to or treat the allegations or the comments or the things that a victim might say about the mistreatment that they've received. It takes a certain level of skill in a divorce professional, I think.
Yes.
And I think you probably agree, to deal with understanding how that trauma manifests and how we might be better prepared to deal with someone who's been that. So let's break that down even further. From the victim's point of view, what can they do to help the professional understand that they may need a trauma-informed approach?
Well, first of all, I think a good step for them is to seek out a trauma-informed therapist so that they can better understand the trauma. Does the trauma go all the way back to childhood, and then abuse actually compounds that? That's a big issue that a lot of people won't face because they don't want to look back. That's something that I think can compound the trouble. I think something key that you said was well-intentioned divorce professional, because in many cases, we don't know how to talk to them. We have our own biases, we have our own challenges, and we normally handle a case a certain way. So, from the victim's point of view, you need to be as skilled as possible in asking questions in the interview of the divorce professional, right? You need to find out, has this person ever handled a case, for example, with domestic violence? And then the second step is to come to a very clear understanding of the expectations of the victim as well as the divorce professional. Because if you're expecting the divorce professional to get everything in your favor without any input from you, you're going to be extremely disappointed. The other aspect to watch out for is to become very knowledgeable about legal abuse and how an abuser can continue to abuse someone through the legal process, and to talk with your attorney or your mediator about that.
Well, and that's a very important aspect, because legal abuse, and one of the things that I think that leads to the re-traumatization is that, unfortunately, a lot of the divorce process, well, put in place to facilitate a legal proceeding to move from dispute to conclusion, a lot of the process and the processes can be used to further abuse the victim, such as over filing too many motions, or motions that are frivolous or abusive in their nature. Because, as I've always said to clients, paper won't refuse ink. So they can file motions that say anything, and you have to deal with them, right? That's a very common form of legal abuse.
Absolutely. I have a client that the abuser creates some form of motion or letter every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. when her attorney is not accessible. And the attorney doesn't preface it when they send out that document. And so that victim is kind of freaking out, calls me, and I try and talk her down, if you will, from the ledge. Yeah. Because not only is it shocking, but frequently they don't understand the legalese involved in the communication. I have another client whose abuser would file letters and motions to receive $1.32 for a parking pass. Now, talk about the frivolousness of that when this gentleman has hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's phenomenal. But you have to remember that abuser's out for power and control.
And so not for the $1.32, right?
Right.
It has nothing to do.
Exactly. And you left me, I'm going to show you.
Right. I love your two examples because they're spot on to the type of legal abuse that we've all seen over and over again. I want to mention for listeners something significant in what you said. The person who is filing those motions at 4 o'clock on Friday, obviously they're doing that because they hit the inbox. The attorney's not there to support the client. They hit the court filing, so they're pending now. And your client's left swinging and worrying and not understanding for the whole weekend. But significantly, what they've done is they put into place a support system to deal with that. In this case, it's you. They have a coach that they can go to who can help them. As you said, I think it's a great example, right? Talk them off that ledge. And that's an important part, right? One thing that we know about most abusers is they do follow patterns. They do the same things over and over again. And so here for this particular client of yours, he files a motion at 4, you call me and we talk through, or you get in touch with me and we talk through this. So for those out there who are dealing with some sort of consistent ongoing form of abuse, getting your support systems in place and knowing how you're going to deal with the next time they do that is an important mechanism for you.
Yes, I think the other thing that I try and work with an abused client about is communication skills. There's a communication method that has almost become ingrained in you through the abusive relationship. There is also the desire for you to dump every emotion, every fear, everything that happens. But that communication is not necessarily going to get you results or is going to be listened to by court staff or legal professionals. So you need to work on communicating for results rather than communicating what you want to. And that's a biggie, because your whole challenge is getting people to listen to you, to understand. Now, the other side, we talked a little bit about the divorce professional that's handling the case of the victim. The other re-traumatization comes from that person that is defending the abuser and all of the accusations and things that come from that. So you have to be prepared for both sides of the coin.
Well, that's a good point. And I will say most abusers, all humans come in many forms, all divorce attorneys come in many forms. And I will say most abusers tend to go find someone who has a style, perhaps an aggressive, combative style that mirrors their own combative, aggressive style. So yes, you're correct. It's not just your own divorce professionals who maybe unintentionally or who are not prepared to deal with your trauma in an informed way, but also you can be re-traumatized by not just the actions of your abuser, but their team, right? The people that are on their team. And you don't really have a lot of control over who is on their team.
Yeah, the only thing you can do is work to get stronger, to prepare yourself, to put some of your fears, as I would, in a box temporarily, and you walk into that courtroom or you walk into that mediation session or that Zoom call and try and act like that neutral business person devoid of emotion. That will also send your abuser off the edge.
Yeah, well, which can be good, but also you need to be prepared for the reaction that that's going to get from them. Because often when you don't react the way you always have to their abuse, they'll ramp up the abuse, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's a difficult, if this were easy to solve, we wouldn't be talking about it all of the time, over and over again. Exactly. It's not something that's going away. Unfortunately, in fact, domestic violence continues to increase. The statistics continue to go up. One thing I want to say to my colleagues out there, or all colleagues, our divorce colleagues out there, because you mentioned this and we talked about this a minute ago, there are trainings that can help you become a trauma-informed professional. And part of that training is how to do an appropriate intake with your clients to even find out if a trauma-informed approach is necessary. And that is truly an important tool for all of us who want to do the best job that we can. I was just recently on a panel talking about domestic violence and domestic abuse and coercive control and all that. And there was one attorney in the audience, an older gentleman. I'm just going to say, bless his heart. He said he'd been in practice for 30 plus years, like me. And he just must be lucky because he's never had a client who was a victim of domestic abuse. And I think he believed that. And the reality is, right, factually and statistically, that is impossible. It just is that he did not know how to find out if his clients were abused.
Yes, but also that client may not know, may not recognize. And that's the interesting thing. I come back to that statement, but he didn't hit me.
Yep.
And I think that's also in an intake process, something you can help the client with, but you have to be very delicate as how to do it.
Hey, listeners. Are you navigating the tough waters of divorce and feeling overwhelmed by the process? Let me introduce you to Hello Divorce, your ultimate ally in making this journey smoother and less stressful. Hello Divorce offers a modern, affordable approach to divorce combining expert legal advice with easy-to-use online tools. So whether you need help with paperwork, mediation, or simply some guidance, Hello Divorce has you covered. Plus, their flat fee services mean no hidden costs, just clear upfront pricing. Visit hellodivorce.com today to learn more and take the first step toward your fresh start. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. Hello Divorce is here to help. Stay tuned for more from Beverly Price as we continue our discussion of the many invisible scars that complicate healing during and after divorce for victims of abuse in this very special episode of Divorce and Beyond for Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
You didn't cause it. I've been working with a woman almost for a year to watch her get stronger, to watch her not blame herself. But it takes work, because if you think about it, think about all the years that you were subject to it. You're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden feel confident and feel like it's not your fault, but it is the abuser's fault. He's not doing it to you. He's doing it for himself.
If you are finding this episode helpful, check out last week's show with special guest Colleen Cashman, the hangover whisperer. In that episode, we discussed her insights on alcohol use and abuse and her innovative tools and strategies for emotional sobriety. She shared how you can access her free training on the core principles of emotional sobriety in the episode, so be sure to listen to the entire show.
And that's all we're talking about here is balance. It's not black and white, all or nothing. You don't have to stop being a high-performing high achiever. You just have to recognize that drinking every single night so you can keep going, there's a train wreck ahead.
And now we return to today's show.
Now, one thing I think would be very good to the listeners is, can you share how they would find that trauma-informed training?
So they're offered in a variety of different ways. I would say the good old-fashioned Google search would be one of the ways to start. I know mediate.com does a trauma-informed training. I believe it is a downloadable program. If I can find it, listeners, I'll put that in the show notes for you. But there are a lot of the universities do programs on this. A lot of state court programs will do trauma-informed and or part of their DV training. A lot of states now are requiring, thank goodness, additional training over and above the standard training for mediators and judges.
Yes.
There's, sort of a basic mediation training, a basic judicial training, and then there's additional domestic violence training, and the trauma information is also being incorporated into those trainings.
There is DV training out there, but a lot of the focus has been about statistics and what kinds of abuse there are. There's very little focus on the psychology of the victim, how they're feeling, what their experience is. And that's what we hope to deal with the Divorce Coalition, is to help educate people on what's really going on the inside of the victim to help the divorce professional improve the process.
Well, I think that's a really important aspect of what we're talking about here, because we jumped right into how people are re-traumatized. But one of the things that we know as a result of being traumatized in a relationship is very often people have buried the trauma. How many people out there who are listening everything's fine, everything's just fine, nothing is wrong, it's not that bad, whatever those things are. And they don't, as you just said, they don't even recognize in this moment as they head into the divorce that they are a victim, that they have been traumatized, and that their responses to the divorce process and how it's playing out very well may be the result of their trauma. So I have seen people, let me give an actual example, right? In mediations where there's clearly a power imbalance going,
Correct.
Probably because of some kind of, even if it was financial abuse or clearly financial abuse, we see that all the times. But you will see the person who is the victim of that abuse just say, oh, that's fine. Oh, I'll accept that.
Exactly.
And as a practitioner, that's probably a trauma response.
Yes. And then there's also playing into that is triggers, that the abuser may know how to trigger that trauma and bring it up. So both of those, again, I think cry out for some type of trauma counseling for the victim so that they can understand their trauma. Think about if you were in court and you didn't acknowledge or understand that you had been traumatized in childhood, and you were being interviewed on the stand, and all of a sudden you realize that there was this massive childhood trauma. Think about the emotional impact that would have if you didn't know. So that's why, again, I think professionals can really help in that regard.
Maybe one person to start with, as I sit here and you and I are talking, is I always say to people that I really truly believe in almost every instance, the very first professional you should hire is your divorce coach, is a coach to help you through the process, because the very first thing you are going to deal with in divorce, and that you've likely been dealing with all along, is your emotions.
Yes.
And the person who's best skilled to help you work with those and then build the rest of that team is a well-educated, good divorce coach. But there are divorce coaches like you who are also skilled in helping people who have been victims. So We're talking with you. How would someone find someone, whether if they even suspect they might have been a victim of abuse, or they just want to talk to someone about it? How do they find someone who's a divorce coach, but who also has this special
That is
skill?
Such a challenging aspect. It's similar to, how do you find an attorney that's skilled with domestic violence? There's no source currently that really publishes that information. So you're a little bit subject to a Google search with very strong interview questions, particularly about things like how many cases have you handled, what kind, that kind of thing. So that is a biggie. Now, at the Divorce Coalition, what our mission is we want to create a certification program for divorce professionals in domestic abuse so that you understand the victim. This is not a program that teaches you how to litigate, but it's how to understand that victim, how to interact with them. I was speaking to an attorney the other day who was incredibly well-intentioned, who said something in a way that it totally triggered and set off her client. And it took the client a couple of days to even come back to the attorney and tell her how she felt about that. And she felt awful about it, but she didn't know. So there's all kinds of things out there. But I'm hoping that this certification program, where we can publish who has been through it, will be one step in the process.
Well, and I think that's a hugely important step, right? That is, a sign that I think we're moving forward. We're starting to acknowledge that these additional trainings, as we've been talking about, are incredibly needed. We're also, I think it's important that the people out there who are actually living this trauma know that the resources are out there, but they right now are not that easy to find.
Exactly. Now, sometimes you could do things like contact a divorce coach, and if they don't have that experience, then maybe that coach can refer them. Talking to a trauma therapist who can refer you to a coach, talking to an attorney, talking to a shelter that may know of people. So there are some ways, but right now it's extremely limited.
Well, and so maybe another good place to start is with you. If you think out there, everyone, I'll be putting Beverly's contact information. Listen to her podcast. Check out her website. She has some wonderful resources and information in those two places. And then the divorcecoalition.com as well has a great deal of information. So I don't want to forget about that as we're talking about this, because for most people, what we're talking about may bring awareness, but a lot of what we're saying here is if you think you even fall slightly into, I may have been in an abusive relationship, a lot of the onus, unfortunately, falls to you to find the help that you need.
Right.
And as we've said repeatedly now, it's not that easy to find. We're trying to give you some awareness of it, because awareness is the beginning of everything. Because I know, I've talked to victims of abuse on this podcast. I'm thinking of Amy Polacco, who is one of my, very popular guests. Amy and Dr. Christine have their book coming out, Framed, any minute now, about, the problems with the family court system in dealing with victims of abuse. But Amy said, and it's always stayed with me, because when she was in an abusive relationship, she did not know. She was unaware that her relationship was abusive because of what you just said, right? He didn't hit me.
Right.
And she was sitting in an office with a divorce attorney who said to her very bluntly, "You are the victim of abuse. You need to get to a shelter."
Yes.
And that was the start for Amy of her journey to understanding the process she was going through and being able to start to find help, to becoming to the empowered advocate she is today, like you are.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a journey.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind is there are relationships where you may not consider them abusive, but when you throw the divorce on top of it, all of a sudden people erupt. So you have to be very careful. The other thing I always want to stress is do not leave that relationship without a safety plan. That is incredibly important. There is a huge number of women that are murdered when they leave without a safety plan. So that is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and there's a variety of resources to help you with that. A domestic violence shelter absolutely can help you set up an exit plan to get you, yourself, your children, and your pets away or to safety in a way that, is going to be hopefully absent of any violence and get you to a place where your abuser cannot find you, depending on what your situation is.
Yep.
And often that takes time to plan out. That is not an overnight. I mean, if you're in an emergency situation, get your kids, get your pets, get to a shelter, get to a police station, do what you need to do. But if you are planning an exit strategy, do know, I think it's something like 7 times more likely to be murdered during that.
70% of women are murdered. Yeah. That leave without a safety plan. Yeah.
Incredibly dangerous time.
And whatever you do not sit there with the abuser and say, "I want a divorce," because that is an immediate eruption.
I have that whole episode with Kate Anthony on how to have the talk. One of the things Kate says in that episode is if you are in an abusive relationship, you do not have this talk sitting down face to face with your spouse saying, "We're getting a divorce." You have an exit plan, you have a strategy, and safety is the number one thing.
Absolutely.
Before we end this episode, I do want to talk about another aspect that we unfortunately see for victims of abuse.
Sure.
And that is their own internal turmoil, guilt, regret. They very often shame having been victimized. There's so much of their own internal struggle that they have as well. And again, not only are they dealing with the trauma, but now they have to deal with their own internal struggle. Yeah. All while trying to go through this process. So, what would you say to the survivor's guilt, the self-blame issues that people may be struggling with?
Well, first of all, I understand. I've been there and I've felt it. And there is nothing wrong about feeling it. It's almost a automatic triggered response. But once you have that response, it's time to step forward into another way. If you have children, to step forward to them. If you have family, to step forward to them. And take a look at what happened to you versus what you caused. And I will be very specific about that, is you didn't cause it. So there is no point in shame, even though we feel shamed. A coach can actually help. I've been working with a woman almost for a year to watch her get stronger, to watch her not blame herself. But it takes work, because if you think about it, think about all the years that you were subject to it. You're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden feel confident and feel like it's not your fault, but it is the abuser's fault. He's not doing it to you. He's doing it for himself.
Yeah. And it's his own, her, whomever the abuser is, it's their own internal issues, and it is on them. I think it's important, something that you said there, to highlight, because what you see for so many people is that when they have been a victim in a relationship, in an abusive relationship, if they do not do the work and get empowered and get beyond that, unfortunately, statistics say, and human nature is, you are going to get into another abusive relationship, and it will become a pattern.
I'm proof of that. I did that.
Listen to Beverly's first episode, and Beverly has, quite a story of what she went through, and she very bravely shares it to let you know that this cycle of abuse, unfortunately, in a victimhood, can repeat if you don't have the ability to work with someone and get beyond that, right?
Yes. And the other thing I would like to add is that many times a victim says they will stay for the children, but those children, by being there, are being taught how that spouse is to be treated, whether it's the mother, whether it's the father. And that then internalizes to them how they should be taught and treated. So don't stay for the children, because you're actually harming the children and not doing for them.
Well, and in fact, there are many studies that say children being subjected to seeing domestic violence are victims of domestic violence. Just seeing their other parent abused, or their caretaker or other family member being abused, is a form of child abuse itself. Absolutely. And so do not participate in that, because you're just creating additional generational trauma that likely your abuser was a part of that cycle at some point in them. I don't say that to engender sympathy, but understanding that this is a generational trauma. This is something that is handed down in families of origin. People learn to be abusers, and people, unfortunately, can learn to be victims.
And the one last point I would make in that regard is the statement, "But he loves me." If someone loves you, they don't treat you that way. If someone is behaving that way, they don't have the capacity for true love. So keep that in mind as well.
I know, it's so hard. It's so hard.
Oh, it's unbelievably difficult.
Yeah. Neither Beverly nor I are saying in any way that it's just a simple thing to just
absolutely
turn your back on the relationship and find that bravery. And it's an incredible, incredible amount of bravery that it takes to leave an abusive relationship.
Absolutely.
But you're beyond. I always talk about how your beyond can be beautiful.
Yes.
Beverly is a shining example of a beautiful beyond abusive relationships, beyond so much. And recognizing that you are in an abusive relationship is the first step to getting to that beyond.
Yep.
So I do want to mention, if anyone out there is in a dangerous situation, one, I did say get to a shelter, find a shelter near you, get to the police, call 911 if it's an immediate situation, or you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That number is 800-799-7233. I will put other resources in the show notes for you. If you know someone who is in danger, reach out to them, provide these resources to them. Do so in a way, I want to say, that their abuser will not see the communication from you, because that can also put them into a dangerous situation.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Beverly, the work that you are doing both in your practice and with the Divorce Coalition, with the podcast, it's just an incredible light and incredible resource for people who are in one of the darkest places that you can really be in. So thank you so much for what you're doing. As we wind up, let people know the best ways to find you, find the podcast, find the resources, and find the Divorce Coalition.
Absolutely. You can find me at Her Empowered Divorce, or if you choose to contact me without having the word divorce in it, if it's a safety issue, you can reach me at Beverly at coachingbybeverlyprice.com. You can also visit the Divorce Coalition website. It does have an emergency exit, but what we are focused on is really changing the face of divorce through divorce professionals. If you are a victim needing help, I would encourage you to go to the same sources that Susan mentioned, the hotline and the shelters.
Yeah, every community has a shelter. I know it's hard to reach out for that kind of help, but honestly, they are trained. They are there to help you. They will help you. And that exit plan is incredibly important as you're doing this. So this month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It is something to be aware of all times, but we really want to shine an extra light right now. Please share this episode. Please post it. Please, make sure that you share the resources that we've talked about here. Reach out to Beverly. As I mentioned, she has her podcast, many, many episodes that will help you. The Divorce Coalition website has a variety of different resources that are helpful to people. This is the month where we really want people to take that extra step to, post on your social media, put resources out there, make a donation to your local domestic violence shelter, anything that you can do to support. This is, something that really needs at all times that light shown, but we're going to try and help it right now in this month. Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.